Now this is not always necessary, but exchange might impose limits on how much the contract price can change from the previous day's settlement price. Now take an example. Let's say that the contract price is equal to $10, and let's say that the exchange imposes a limit of $4. So essentially then the exchange is saying that the maximum that the price can become on a given day is $14, and the minimum that the price can become on a given day is $6. So if the price moves to either $14 and stays there or comes down to $6, then we say that is a limit move. If the price goes up to 14 and is stuck there, then we call that a limit up. If the price comes down to $6 and stays there, then that's called a limit down. And effectively, let's just take a scenario first before we come to the limit locked situation. Let's say that on a given day there is immense interest in the underlying and the price goes up to 14. And let's say that traders are willing to also buy and sell for $15 on that day. But once the price hits 14, then all trading in that contract will cease, and at least officially on the exchange the trading will cease, and the price will be stuck at 14. The next day, if the interest is still very high, then there will still be no trading. If buyers and sellers want to trade at 15, there will still be no trading and we will be stuck at 14. However, if the interest subsides and the price comes back down to under 14 and people are willing to buy or sell for say 13.95, then transactions can happen. But if for a number of days we are either locked here at 14 or we are locked at 6, then we can say that we are limit locked. And here the exchange can intervene. So the exchange can then essentially assign a new price or open up the limit. And let's say we go with a scenario where there is tremendous amount of interest, the exchange can open up trading and allow trading to then happen at $15. So key point is that the exchange has flexibility to open up the limit if it so wants. Now let's talk about the methods to terminate a futures position. There is a fair amount of detail in the curriculum on this, but I think as long as you just understand the core points, that should be good enough. So one method of terminating a futures contract is to simply take a reverse position or a offsetting position. So for example, if you are in a contract to buy a certain underlying, and let's say that the contract expiry date is 31st July, what you could do, say you've taken let's say you took a long position for this expiry date. Now a few days before, let's say a couple of days before, you can take a offsetting position, so you can essentially then get into a short position. So you take a opposite position, and depending on the price of the contract, if the price of the contract has gone up, then obviously the long benefits. If the price has gone down, then the long has lost out. But the core point is that a reversal simply means that if you had a long position, then you take a opposite position, and for obvious reasons that's basically called a offsetting trade. The other is a cash settlement. So essentially what happens with the cash settlement is you figure out how much you owe the exchange or how much the exchange owes you, and that amount is settled in cash. Another way is the delivery of asset. So if we have a delivery of an asset, there the short is responsible for delivering the asset to the long, and obviously the long needs to pay the contractually agreed upon price. Typically with delivery of asset, or at times with the delivery of asset, the short has an option has some delivery options. So if the short has options about which specific item to deliver, where to deliver, or flexibility in terms of when to deliver, then those options are valuable to the short. We'll see this in the context of treasury bonds later. Another way of terminating a futures position is through the exchange for physicals. In an exchange for physicals, actually what can happen is, say you are long and you identify another party that is short on the same contract. You can meet with the short party outside the exchange and simply settle with this short, and then inform both parties, then need to inform the exchange that this settlement has taken place, and obviously then the position for both the long and short is terminated. Over the next few slides, we'll talk about some specific futures contracts that the CFA Institute wants you to know, and these contracts are treasury bill contracts, euro dollar, treasury bond, stock index, and currency contracts. So let us start with the T-bill futures contract, and this is the US T-bill that we are talking about. The first comment here is that it's based on a notional principal 1 million and the underlying is a 90-day T-bill. So this notional principal really means that one contract means that in that one contract we have T-bills with a par value of 1 million. And what exactly now does this mean? So what does it mean to say that you are long, let's say you are long one contract of this futures contract? So what does that mean? What that means is, let's say that this is time 0, this is where you take your long position, and let's say that this contract expires on day 30. So when you go long, effectively that means that you are getting into a contract to buy the $100 million worth of T-bills, or 100 million par value worth of 90-day T-bills on this date, on maturity. So on day 0, you are getting into a contract to buy T-bills on this day. And more specifically, you are getting into a contract to buy 90-day T-bills on this day. Now, how are these quoted? So on day 0, let's say that the contract is quoted at 93.75, and I'm using an example from the curriculum so you can follow this easily in the curriculum also. So let's say that this is the quote, and just as an aside, this convention of using 100 minus the annualized 90-day T-bill, this convention is called the IMM convention. So you open up your newspaper or you check online and you see that the futures contract that is expiring in 30 days is currently quoted at 93.75. So what exactly does this mean? What are you going to get on day 30? Let's look at this formula here now. The quote 93.75 is 100 minus the annualized 90-day T-bill rate. So if 93.75 is 100 minus this annualized 90-day T-bill rate, then the annualized 90-day T-bill rate must be 6.25%, because 100 minus 6.25% will give you 93.75. So what this means is, on day 0, if you get into this futures contract on this day 0, then per this contract on day 30 you will get $1 million par value worth of 90-day T-bills, which are yielding 6.25%. Now again, recall from earlier lectures that on T-bills, when we give this quoted percentage, this is based on a discount. So it is based on a discount to par value. So how do you figure out how many dollars worth of T-bills are you getting? And the answer again is straightforward. You have seen this before, but just to do our calculation, the par value is 1 million. The annualized discount is 6.25. So what is the discount for a 90-day period? The discount for a 90-day period is equal to 0.0625. That's simply converting the percent into decimal, and changing this for so that's annualized. Changing this into a 90-day period will give you 0.0625 into 90 over 360. So that is the discount. Now this is the discount that is applied to a $1 million par value. So the amount that the T-bills will be worth over here will be equal to 1 minus this multiplied by 1 million. So remember that this number that you calculate over here is your discount to par. So to come up with the value of the T-bills that you will get at expiry of the futures contract, you do 1 minus the 90-day version of a 6.25% discount yield and multiply that by 1 million, and this should give you 983,750. So what this is saying is, when you get into a futures contract on day 0 where the quoted price is 93.75, then on day 30 where the contract expires, you will get T-bills worth 983,750, and obviously given a bank discount yield of 6.25%, this means that 90 days later, so 90 days later, this bond will if you get this bond over here for 93,750, that's how much you will actually have to pay in dollar terms. 90 days later this will become 1 million, and 1 million discounted back to 983,750 is essentially the 6.25% yield. So what is one tick or one minimum price change in the context of a T-bill futures contract? And the answer is, it is 0.0001, which is 0.01%, 1 basis point. And 1 basis point represents $25 per $1 million contract. Just to highlight this point, let's say you go long when the price is quoted at 93.75. So if you take a long position and the next day, let's say the price goes to 93.76, that means that $25 will be added to your account per contract. If obviously the price goes up the following day by 2 basis points, then the amount added to your account is 25 times 2, which is $50. So hopefully you can now understand why this sort of a convention is used. As you are familiar with by now, what you want to see is, for a long position, you benefit when the price of the underlying goes up. So the price of the underlying is quoted in this convention. As you see this price go up, the long is happy. If this price goes down, then the long will be unhappy. Had we simply quoted this based on an interest rate, then that would have created a convoluted issue where interest rate going up is bad for a bondholder, so and interest rate going down would be good for a bondholder. So then we would have a opposite situation, which would become rather confusing. Hence this convention where we use 100 minus the annualized rate. So notice that if the rate goes down, that's good for the bondholder. So rate going down means that this IMM metric goes up. So rate goes down, the quoted amount goes up, and the holder of the long position is happy. Now let's talk about the euro dollar futures. And since the market was so used to the quoting convention for T-bill futures, when the euro-dollar futures were introduced, the market simply uses practically the same convention for euro-dollars. Even though in general T-bills are quoted on a discount basis, and in general euro-dollar time deposits or CDs are quoted on a add-on basis, but nevertheless when we talk about euro-dollar futures, they are quoted exactly the same way as T-bills. So notice even the notional principal is the same. So based on a notional principal of 1 million, based on a 90-day LIBOR, and quoted using the IMM convention where we use 100 minus annualized 90-day LIBOR. Like T-bills, these are also settled, like T-bill futures, these are also settled in cash, and like before, one tick represents 1 basis point or 0.01%, and an increase of 1 tick represents a $25 benefit to the long on a $1 million contract. So all the calculations for euro-dollar futures are the same as the calculations that I just showed you on the previous slide. Now we'll talk about Treasury bond futures. So these Treasury bonds essentially are traded for $100,000 par bonds. So that's our notional principal, but the constraint is that the bonds must have a maturity of greater than 15 years. Now when you get into a contract, say as the long party, the short party has an option to deliver any of several bonds. So the reason we have this thing in place is to avoid a run on a particular bond. So if this contract were based on a specific bond, then as the futures contract expires, the short party would rush to buy that bond, and that might convolute the price. Hence, the way these futures contracts are structured, the short is allowed to deliver any of a whole range of bonds, and effectively what happens is the exchange defines a conversion factor, so more valuable bonds receive higher payments. So obviously different bonds will have different coupon rates, and that's just one example. The different bonds might be, have slightly different liquidity and so on. So different bonds will have slightly different values, and to bring all the bonds to a similar base, the exchange specifies a conversion factor for every bond. But the calculation for this conversion factor is somewhat simplistic. So even when we apply the conversion factor, there will be some bonds that are cheaper for the short relative to other bonds, and the bond that is cheapest for the short to deliver is called the cheapest to deliver. Now how we come up with the conversion factor and so on, this is complicated. This is covered in level 2. All you really need to know at this stage is that dealing with Treasury bond futures has this complication where the short has several different bonds from which to choose. The second point is that the exchange for every bond will have a conversion factor, where there is a formula for calculating the conversion factor, but you don't need to know that formula. And despite that formula, there will be a bond which is the cheapest or the best bond for the short to deliver, and that bond is called the cheapest to deliver. Clearly I'm skipping several details, but fortunately for you, those details are not necessary at this stage. Treasury bond futures are again quoted in percentage terms, and they are actually quoted either in points. So you might have a bond quoted at 90, a Treasury bond future quoted at 98.6525 or in fractions of 32. So this same thing could also be quoted as 98 and 18/32. So for a contract covering $1,000 par bond, effectively this means that the price is this. So Here the tick is 1/32, which for a $100,000 par bond is 31.25. And again, as always, the long benefits when the price goes up. So if the price goes up by if the price is currently quoted at 98 and 18/32, one tick up would mean that the price is quoted at 98 and 19/32. This means that on a per contract basis the long has benefited by $31.25. And obviously if the price goes down, then that is a loss for the long and a benefit for the short. Stock index futures, these are fairly popular, and we have index futures on the FTSE, the Nikkei, the CAC in France, DAX Germany, and the S&P 500 in the US. Perhaps the world's most popular stock index futures are on the S&P 500. Index futures are settled in cash because of the obvious reason that it would not be so easy to simply deliver all the all the 225 shares underlying this or the 500 shares underlying the S&P. So futures contracts are settled in cash. And also with futures contracts we typically have a multiplier. In the case of the S&P 500 we have a multiplier of $250. Now how does this work? Let's say that we have the S&P 500 index future which is currently quoted at 1240. Now this represents the price of the index, and let's again be clear about what this means. Let's say that we are talking about the December futures contract for the S&P 500. Let's say at time 0 we are here October 25th, and this futures contract expires in December, so later this year. So what does this mean? And the exchange will specify exactly what day in December this contract expires. Effectively what we are saying is that when you go long one contract, that contract will have a multiplier of 250. So let's first take a one contract situation. So you go long one contract when the price is 1240. Let's say next day, which is day 1, the price goes up by $1. If the price goes up by $1, then the benefit to the long is $1 multiplied by 250, which is equal to 250. So if the price goes up by 1, the long benefits by 1 times the multiplier, which is 250. If the price goes up by 2, then the long benefits by 500 and the short loses by 500, and so on. Now what if you went long 10 contracts? So again the maths is very straightforward. So if you go long 10 contracts and the price goes up by 1, then on a per contract basis you made 250. On 10 contracts you made 250 into 10, which is equal to 2500. Finally, currency futures. We spoke about currency forwards in the previous lecture, and actually the currency forwards market is much larger than the currency futures market, but nevertheless currency futures are actively traded in the US, so you need to know how they work. We have in the US currency contracts for the euro, for Mexican peso, Japanese yen, Canadian dollars, and so on, generally all major currencies. So how does this work? Currency contracts are set in units of the foreign currency, and the price is stated in dollars per unit. So a very popular contract is the euro contract, where the underlying is 125,000 euros, and this is quoted as shown here in dollars per euro. Again, taking an example from the curriculum, let's say that this contract is currently quoted at 0.8555 per euro. And again, to highlight the point, you are here on day 0. So when you get into the contract price is 0.8555 per euro. This means that when the contract settles, let's say 30 days from today, so at time 0 you are getting into a contract to buy, say you are taking the long position, so you are getting into a contract to buy 125,000 euros at 0.8555 per euro on this day. Now on day 1, for example, let's say, so actually before I go to day 1, what exactly does this mean? So this is the price per euro, then the contract price essentially is 125 euros into $0.8555 per euro, which is equal to 106937. So on day 0 you are getting into a contract to buy 125,000 euros for 106,937.50 dollars. Now if on day 1 the euro appreciates, so the euro on day 1, let's say that this same forward contract on day 1 is now worth quoted at 0.8556. So this went up by 1 tick. The euro appreciated. Remember, the euro is the underlying here. So the underlying went up, which means that the long benefited. By how much? He benefited by 125,000 multiplied by 0.0001. So you can do the maths. So if the underlying had gone up by 2 ticks, then we would simply multiply 125,000 by 0.0002 and so on. So the common theme across the board here with futures is that when the underlying or the quoted amount goes up, the long benefits, and when the quoted amount goes down, then the short benefits. So that is it. You need to practice hard as always. There are 9 questions in the curriculum on this, which you should do very carefully. Most of these questions are not multiple choice, but nevertheless, when you practice these questions, your concepts will get cleared. So that is it. Post any comments that you have on YouTube, and if you liked this video, then click on the like button. If you found this clip interesting and informative, please visit my website www.arifirfanullah.com. Here you will find a tremendous amount of useful material. Right here in the 2011 CFA video lecture series, you will find the entire level 1 curriculum for free, and most of the material here is still relevant. So this is worth looking at. The 2012 video lecture series covers both level 1 and level 2. These lectures are available for a fee. And finally, down here, financial management at IBA. Here you will find my lectures at IBA for a course on financial management. Plus you'll find lots of useful spreadsheets that can help you with financial modeling. So again, please visit www.arifirfanullah.com. Thank you.